So let's drop some Gravis armor in from the skies and talk about the meteoric descent of the Inceptors. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Space Marines once more, and in this video I thought we'd do a full unit review for the Inceptor squad, talk about what they do in game and their strengths and weaknesses. The Inceptors are models that have been around since the start of Primaris. They were present in the 8th edition starter sets Dark Imperium, 3 monopose ones with assault bolters, though Games Workshop fairly rapidly came out with the multi-build sets that they have for sale now, 3 guys armed with bolters or plasma exterminators. Inceptors are essentially chunky Gravis jump pack infantry of the Astartes, in the lore often deployed as a sort of spearhead force to be the first things that touch down in an enemy war zone, hitting the enemy incredibly hard in a focused area, and can often be deployed from the upper atmosphere via Thunderhawk. They hurtle down from the skies, the grav plates they wear on their boots, plus activating the jump packs at the right time keep them from becoming Space Marine pancakes, and then they're free to lay about the foe with dual-wield, high-damage heavy pistols, either the Brutal Assault Bolters or the Plasma Exterminators. The kit from Games Workshop is £37, $60 or €47, and their points per dollar is around about 2.2, which is maybe kind of medium for Space Marines, certainly not standout good, but not quite as bad as some of the other 3 model sets that you have, due to the premium that Inceptors cost in-game at the moment. I'd say the models definitely have their followings, though maybe aren't absolutely universally loved. Gravis armor is pretty chunky, so needs a pretty enormous jump pack to make it look like it's hovering aloft, and they are one of the miniatures with Games Workshop flight stems, which I think do have their advantages in keeping them actually look like they're flying rather than weirdly jumping off terrain like plenty of other miniatures are, but on the other hand aren't particularly great as a solution for the miniature type front. If you glue them in place, they've got quite a high risk of snapping, and if you don't, then over time they might become a little bit loose, falling off their bases a bit too easily even if their friction fit well to start with. I chose to magnetise mine and that worked out quite well for them. In any case, they do have a little bit of kit flexibility, the choice of plasma versus bolters, and sort of armoured welding face masks versus standard helmets as you can see here, so a little bit of customisation on offer. As ever, if you were looking to pick up some Inceptors or Warhammer in general, I've got plenty of discount retailers links down in the video description, which can save anywhere between 10 and 21% on purchases depending on where you are in the world. Inceptors would be $51 in the USA from Wargame Portal, or £32 in the UK with Element Games for example. A big thank you to any of you using those when you do order in models. It does help to support the channel and keep the videos coming. Let's get into their datasheet though. Inceptors are 130 points per 3 now, and you can fill them in squad sizes of 3 to 6. Their points cost certainly took a bit of a hit in 10th edition. They started out the edition kind of weirdly cheap and almost auto-include, but at 30 points you're paying a lot more for their special rule. They most commonly tend to get run in units of 3, as that way you can have more individual units drop in different places if you want to, and I feel like their board positioning is the single biggest thing that they do. They basically have a fusion of Gravis and Jump Pack kind of stat line. 3 wounds at toughness 6 with a 3+ save means that on an individual basis they're probably not going to die to small arms too quickly, but given that they're essentially 43 points per model pretty much, that means that they're really just not durable on a per point kind of basis, and certain damage 3 firepower will wreck them really quickly indeed. They have the Deep Strike rule, which keys into their special rule. They're movement 10 and fly when they're on the board, so fairly speedy and can jump over things, and for scrapping over objectives they're only OC 1, given they're quite a small squad. If they're contesting against virtually anything else, it means they're probably not going to hold the point. They still can have a small amount of presence on lightly defended objectives though. As mentioned, their big fancy special rule is Meteoric Descent, and this is basically the entire rule that sells the unit. It's a 3-inch deep strike special rule, which often other factions might be able to do with certain stratagems or higher investment things. There aren't really all that many things in the game that just allow you to do it just flat out from a datasheet ability, so that is kind of fun. Generally, if the enemy is trying to screen out deep strikers, sometimes it can be hard enough to screen things when they're at 9-inch deep strike range, particularly if you've got a very elite opponent's army. For some factions, deep strike screening to 3 inches is going to be near on impossible, and for that reason it means they can have some really interesting setup options. They're one of the most guaranteed ways of doing certain secondary objectives like behind enemy lines or establish locus, the new deploy teleport homers, as it's going to be rare that an opponent's going to be able to screen out their entire deployment zone from 3-inch deep strikers. You'd have to have horde units everywhere. It can also be a way to pick an unfair fight with one important unit that the opponent really doesn't want to get shredded by assault bolter fire or whatever. Drop super close, wipe out something that's kind of fragile but really quite valuable, and then hopefully have the Inceptors in a place where they're hard to deal with for the rest of the enemy army. And occasionally you might even be able to sneak primary objectives, say if the opponent's not put their model completely centrally on that objective, you might be able to drop just outside of 3 inches and have the Inceptors stand on it. Depending on how much objective control the opponent has, that might or might not matter, but it could be a big deal if you could drop there, wipe out the enemy unit with your shooting, and then hopefully have the point as yours. Overall, it's an absolutely great ability. There's lots of options for how you could use it in game, but they do pay a big points premium for it, and that's why they cost 130 points per 3 of them. When they drop in close, they've got the choice of 2 different guns, either the Assault Bolters or the Plasma Exterminators. Both of the guns have the Assault keyword, so you can advance and shoot with them when they're on the board. They both have the Pistol keyword, so if they get locked up in combat, they can just stay there and blaze away if it makes sense to. And they both have the Twin Links keyword as well, which means that they have a bit more punch against higher toughness things than you might expect. The Pistol keyword was certainly a big boon to them when they gained it versus 9th edition, as they really didn't enjoy just being tagged by some sort of chaff. For the options, you've got the Assault Bolters. They have 3 shots with essentially a heavy bolter style profile to 18 inches, strength 5, AP 1, damage 2, with the Twin Linked keyword. They also have sustained hits 2 as well, so that's 2 additional hits on every hit roll of a 6, and that is quite a significant damage increase. Otherwise, the Plasma Exterminators, either on the undercharge profile, get 2 shots at strength 7, AP 2, damage 2 Twin Linked, and then if you overcharge, they're hazardous, but that goes up to a far scarier strength 8, AP 3 and damage 3, pretty nasty against elite infantry. Hazardous is a big deal for these guys though. If you fail a hazardous check, then you lose a 43-point model, and that's kind of massive. If you are routinely rolling 3 hazardous checks with them, it is going to happen at least fairly regularly. In 10th edition, I feel like Games Workshop often don't balance gun profiles too well, meaning there's often one obvious choice and one that gets left behind quite a bit, but for Inceptors they do seem to have done fairly well. Genuinely, the way that the numbers work out do mean that the 2 guns I think are fairly well balanced given the amount of targets that you might find. The Assault Bolters, as you'd expect, are solidly better against any infantry targets, around about 50% better against, say, Horde infantry targets like Termagants, but also significantly better against standard Space Marine kind of profiles as well, which I feel like often isn't the case if you've got sort of bigger, heavier hitting guns versus slightly lighter guns out there. The Plasma Exterminators tend to really come into their own against anything that is toughness 10 or more, or 3 wound infantry. You can see they're significantly better against Terminators or Land Raiders here, but kind of even against sort of toughness 9 vehicles like a Space Marine Rhino. They also only really get ahead as well if you are overcharging them, otherwise they're quite significantly behind on the regular undercharged profile. Overall, between all that, it just sort of depends on the sort of firepower you want for the situations they're commonly going to find themselves in against the armies that you tend to play. If you're regularly playing things like 3 wound Custodies, or loads of toughness 10 or higher monsters and vehicles, the Plasma Exterminators are probably going to do better. For more sort of standard Marine or Horde style infantry type profiles, the Bolters will do better, and people do use both in competitive. Overall, putting that all together, the Inceptors are a 130 point unit. Their biggest strength and reason to take them is that 3-inch deep strike, loads of good uses for that. The damage output is okay, though I'd say not crazy standout for 130 points. It's more interesting because you can get it exactly where you need it to, and they do have some nice synergies with detachments as we'll get into. For downsides, they do have kind of low toughness when they're on the board, particularly for 130 points. Anti-tank and special weapons will destroy them pretty quickly. They're very much paying a premium for their deep strike rule now, and sometimes in any individual game you might have difficult decisions as to how to use them, several ways in which they could impact a game, but maybe not obvious exactly which one is the right one. I feel like I've certainly had a few games with Inceptors where they could do, say, one of any 3 fairly interesting type actions, but all of which have their disadvantages and none of them actually swing the game in a crazy way. Even if sometimes they might have just one manoeuvre that's absolutely spectacular, and can both be a way to score points and deal damage to critical stuff at the same time. From core rules and detachments, there's a few different ways in which they can get a bit of support. If you did want absolutely maximal damage on the target they're striking against, you could Oath of Moment it for essentially 33% extra damage output. Could be big if it's just something absolutely vital they need to hit with all they've got, though you'd have to weigh that up against all your other damage dealers elsewhere. For stratagem things, occasionally Overwatch could be handy. They are at least fairly punchy shooting infantry. though it might be one that you'd consider more with the Assault Bolters than the Plasma Exterminators. Every hit of a 6 that you get with the Assault Bolter turns into 3 hits, so it means that on average you tend to get either 3 or 6 hits with a 3-man unit. It's not loads, but if literally all you need is one failed save to do something critical, it could be worth a go. Armour of Contempt is always good for a little bit of durability, though it's not exactly going to make them into a durable unit overall, will depend on the situation and the fight that they're in. And for 1 command point, you could potentially rapid ingress with them. Could be plenty of opportunity for shenanigans with both a 3-inch deep striker and rapid ingress. Means that you could get them to, say, the back of the enemy board and all ready to do nastiness from behind a ruin when it comes to your turn, potentially meaning that that could be another way to get onto an objective after dealing damage and maybe even having charge with them if it made sense. In general though, I feel like it might be a little bit overkill given that they're an expensive unit and already get very good deployment options anyway. Otherwise, for support, they maybe don't need support quite as much as some of the other Codex Space Marine units. They tend to be kind of happy just doing their own thing in isolation. I guess theoretically you could use things like +1 to wound vehicles and monsters from a Storm Speed or Thunderstrike, or Incursors for a +1 to hit, but I feel like they're probably better for just buffing a more standard gun line as opposed to the sneaky Deep Strikers. They don't have any character options that can join the unit, and there's no real point pushing them in transport. The reserve rules are kind of their whole thing and the reason that you pay lots of points for them. For detachment buffs, most of the most competitively played ones do at least have something interesting for them. Firestorm could get your Assault Bolters to Strength 6, which is a fair bit punchier. Would be nice to be wounding things like Toughness 5 infantry on a 3+ re-rolling. And they do have a +1 to wound stratagem when they're targeting their closest thing. That could be really big against anything they were wounding on a 5 otherwise. Particularly nice for those plasma weapons to be wounding Toughness 12 on a 4+ re-rolling. That's to be a lot of very nasty focused damage there. For the Gladius Task Force, Tactical Doctrine could be handy enough if they do wind up in combat. They could just stay there and blaze away with pistols, but often it makes sense to drop back and either go to safety or not risk being wiped out in melee if they don't shoot their target to death. There's also a couple of stratagems that could be very nice on them. Storm of Fire with the Ignores cover and extra AP could be really big. If you've got some Assault Bolters that are attacking some standard Space Marine profiles, I guess in theory that's an extra +2 AP essentially. If you do happen to be trying to wipe out some Space Marines in cover, the reactive move stratagem could be nice as well, quite a powerful trick where you'd either get to move d6 inches or 6 inches when the enemy comes close to you. You could do some Phobos Lieutenant style shenanigans there if you drop next to a ruin wall. Potentially the opponent moves round so they can shoot you, so you just wander over to the other side of the wall to hide. For the Vanguard Spearhead, they tend to be one of the detachments where Inceptors are used most often. They get cover and stealth at greater than 12 inches, which I guess isn't terrible for their durability, though by their nature they do tend to be getting kind of close. Perhaps one of the biggest things is that they could potentially return to reserves if they needed, allowing another 3-inch deep strike elsewhere on the board if they drop somewhere and then were unengaged, and could even allow you to turn 1 3-inch deep strike with them if you happen to be going second and you chose to set them up on the board and budgeted a command point. With the return to reserves thing, I have seen some people running them in 6s there, maybe more so than in other places. Otherwise they've got that nice reactive movement to back away from enemy charges, and quite a nice shooting damage buff with +1 to hit and an AP boost, though you do have to be at least at 12 inches away for that, which is maybe a bit at odds with what they normally want to do. Otherwise, the other things are perhaps a bit niche for them. Iron Storm single rerolls could be nice on Plasma. Stormlance could allow advancing, shooting and charging, though their combat isn't crazily good. And Anvil Siege Force has a couple of shooting support stratagems, they're not really particularly any better on these guys compared with other things. In general, I perhaps wouldn't rate them as a unit that's enormously better in any one chapter, though I guess they can get a few peripheral benefits. Blood Angels would make them hit a bit harder in melee with their +2 strength and the extra attack on the charge, could bully some lighter infantry a little bit there at least. They are still AP 0 there though. The Black Templars and the Space Wolves can start the game with a 6+ Feel No Pain if they want, which will be nice enough for a little bit of extra defense, but perhaps particularly for the Plasma Exterminators, so that when you overcharge one it doesn't just insta-kill an entire model if you pass one test. And Dark Angels could have some useful stuff from the Unforgiven Task Force, such as lethal hits or ignores cover, though that doesn't exactly tend to be the most common detachment that they use. They tend to be playing a bit more Gladius in competitive play. As for how they're used in game at the moment, I thought it would be interesting enough just to see how many competitive lists are taking Inceptors currently. They certainly used to be near enough auto-include when they were more like 110 or 115 points, but now seem to be more of a pick that can absolutely be used competitively, but not every list is falling over themselves to include them. I just took a quick look at the last 10 high placing Space Marine lists in tournaments. Inceptors were used in 3 of them, typically used in 1 or 2 3-man squads in the army. Kind of as you'd expect there for a high investment utility type unit. You wouldn't generally want to go crazily heavy on them, otherwise you're going to just have a bit too little damage and defense or fewer utility units elsewhere. Currently when people are taking Space Marine units for doing their sort of skirmishing, secondaries and objective type things, maybe the main competitor with them is Jump Intercessors. 80 points for 5 Space Marines with fairly good damage and defense for that cost. They can drop in normally and can rapid ingress, though of course can't do the godly 3-inch drop, but give them good movement and ability to move up the board and engage in melee a bit better. It seems that lots and lots of lists are turning to them for their sort of secondary skirmishing type role, maybe in combination with some scouts as well. Currently it does seem that more people are using the Jump Assault Intercessors, though Inceptors are still very much played. Overall, as it goes, I feel like Inceptors are actually really quite well balanced right now, a pretty fun dynamic, an interesting unit to use tactically, a super powerful ability but pays a big premium for it, and basically the challenge with using them is to try and get good value of that ability, as if you just literally drop them in to deal direct damage to your opponent and then get hit back, it's probably not going to be worth the overall trade versus taking other things. If I were running them in a Space Marine army list, I'd take 1 or 2 3-man units. I'm pretty equally happy with either weapon option. Personally, I slightly prefer the Assault Bolters out of the two, though I think there's not really all that much in it. I pretty much always look to start them in reserve, given that's where they get their main value from, and then in turns 2 and turn 3, you just need to look out for the absolute best chance of when they're going to drop in to influence the game. Things like establishing locus and behind enemy lines, if they get drawn that turn if you're using tactical secondaries, are pretty much exactly what they want to be doing. There's plenty of other secondaries where they might be the unit that can do them if you need to. Just having very free range deep strike is going to give you lots of options, and also you can look at the same time if there's options for dealing precision damage to say things on primary objectives, perhaps taking out a key enemy synergy piece or wiping out a squad that was going to hold an objective and score your opponent 5 primary points next turn. Bonus points if you can also nose the Inceptor unit onto that objective, or to drop them where they take something out and then also manage to hide somewhere safe so you can get another turns of movement and damage dealing in. I think the main danger of them is not achieving enough for the 130 points that you pay for them. Maybe if they just drop in and wipe out something like a 60-point troop squad and score 2 victory points or something, and then just get killed kind of trivially, you might just have been better off with other things. So definitely a unit that needs a bit more thought than some. In any case, let me know what you make of the Jump Pack Gravis Boys in 10th edition then. How have they been performing in your games? Look forward to hearing all your thoughts down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones each day. I'm sure we'll have plenty more for the Space Marines. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.